Absolutely not. Policy restrictions prevent any performance bonuses this quarter, my boss Marcus Thompson declared, leaning back in his leather chair with that smug smile I had grown to despise. I sat across from his mahogany desk in our Austin office, my hands folded calmly in my lap despite the rage burning inside me. Just 3 days earlier, I had single-handedly prevented what could have been the most catastrophic data breach in TechFlow Industries' history, saving the company an estimated $2 million annually. But apparently, that wasn't enough to earn me the $50,000 bonus Marcus had promised when he assigned me this impossible task. I understand completely, I replied with a serene smile, watching his eyebrows raise slightly at my unexpected composure. What Marcus didn't know was that I had anticipated this exact scenario. The man sitting across from me had built his entire career on taking credit for other people's innovations, and I had learned not to trust his promises. My name is Vicky Collins, and I'm a 32-year-old senior software engineer at TechFlow Industries, one of Austin's fastest-growing tech companies. For the past 4 years, I had watched Marcus climb the corporate ladder by claiming ownership of solutions his team developed. This time, however, I had prepared for his inevitable betrayal. 3 weeks ago, our client database had suffered a massive security vulnerability that threatened to expose sensitive information from over 500,000 customers. The breach would have resulted in lawsuits, regulatory fines, and a reputation disaster that could have bankrupted our mid-sized company. While Marcus panicked and the executive team scrambled for solutions, I worked 18-hour days to develop a revolutionary algorithm that not only plugged the security hole, but enhanced our entire data protection system. Marcus had stood over my shoulder during those grueling weeks, asking endless questions about my methodology while I coded. "This is incredible work, Vicky," he had said, practically salivating as he watched my fingers fly across the keyboard. "When you save the company, there will definitely be a bonus in it for you. 50,000 minimum." I should have known better than to trust him, but exhaustion had clouded my judgment. The pressure to solve this crisis had consumed every waking moment, leaving little time to consider Marcus's track record of broken promises. Now, watching him dismiss my contribution with corporate buzzwords about budget constraints, I felt a familiar cold determination settle in my chest. "I'm glad you understand," Marcus continued, already turning his attention to his computer screen. "Sometimes these things are out of our hands. Corporate policies, you know how it is." But as I walked back to my cubicle, my smile never wavered. Marcus had no idea that my security patch contained a very special feature, a 30-day expiration date that only I knew about. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and began documenting everything. Marcus had already started taking credit for my algorithm in emails to the executive team, describing it as our innovative solution and the breakthrough we achieved. He carefully avoided mentioning my name in any correspondence, instead referring to his team's collaborative effort and his own leadership in crisis management. I screenshot every email, saved every presentation slide, and recorded every meeting where Marcus presented my work as his own. During our weekly team meetings, he would gesture broadly at charts showing the money saved and the disasters averted, never once acknowledging that the solution came entirely from my mind and my sleepless nights. "As you can see from these projections," Marcus announced to the gathered engineers, pointing at slides that displayed my algorithm's impact, "our security initiative has exceeded all expectations. The board is very pleased with our performance." The way he emphasized "our" made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral and continued taking notes. My colleague Jessica, who sat beside me, leaned over and whispered, "Isn't this the code you developed? Why isn't he mentioning your name?" I shrugged casually. "He's the manager. I'm sure he'll give proper credit when it matters," I replied, knowing full well that Marcus would never voluntarily share recognition. Jessica frowned, but said nothing more. Meanwhile, I had quietly begun updating my resume and reaching out to contacts at competing companies. My work on the security algorithm had been groundbreaking enough to attract attention from several major tech firms, and I started scheduling discreet coffee meetings with recruiters. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's theft of my credit was actually opening doors I might never have had access to otherwise. Each day, I maintained my normal work routine while watching the countdown in my head. Marcus continued his victory lap, attending executive meetings where he presented detailed reports about his cost-saving solution. He even had the audacity to submit the project for a company innovation award, listing himself as the primary contributor. 2 weeks into my 30-day countdown, rumors began circulating that Marcus was being considered for a promotion to Senior Director of Technology. The position came with a 60% salary increase and stock options, rewards he would receive based entirely on my stolen work. "Congratulations," I told him when he mentioned the potential promotion during a hallway conversation. "Your leadership on the security project really paid off." His chest puffed up with pride. "Well, you know what they say about rising to the occasion. When the company needed solutions, I delivered." The shamelessness of his statement was almost impressive. As I walked away, I checked my phone discreetly. 23 days and counting. Soon, Marcus would learn the difference between taking credit for someone's work and actually understanding it. By the 3rd week, Marcus's arrogance had reached new heights. He had received official confirmation of his promotion and spent most of his time in meetings with senior leadership, discussing his revolutionary approach to cybersecurity. The $50,000 bonus he had denied me was nothing compared to his new salary package, which reportedly included a signing bonus of $100,000 and annual stock options worth even more. During his farewell lunch with our team, Marcus raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. "Here's to solving impossible problems and proving that innovation comes from strong leadership," he declared, looking directly at me with that insufferable smirk. "Sometimes you have to push your team beyond their comfort zones to achieve greatness." I smiled and raised my own mug. "Here's to getting exactly what you deserve," I replied cheerfully. The other team members chuckled, assuming I was being supportive, but Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly as if he sensed some hidden meaning. That afternoon, I received 3 job offers from different companies, each offering substantial increases in both salary and responsibility. TechFlow's biggest competitor, Innovate Solutions, had been particularly aggressive in their recruitment, offering me a position as senior systems architect with a starting salary that doubled my current income. They had heard about my security work through industry channels and wanted to hire me immediately. I accepted Innovate Solutions' offer, but negotiated a start date that would give me time to watch the final act of my carefully orchestrated plan. They agreed enthusiastically, eager to secure my expertise before other companies could make competing offers. Meanwhile, Marcus had moved into his new corner office and hired his replacement, a junior developer named Kevin, who had no experience with advanced security systems. During the handover meetings, I watched Marcus attempt to explain my algorithm to Kevin, stumbling over technical concepts he clearly didn't understand. "The system is basically self-maintaining now," Marcus told Kevin confidently. "Vicky can help you if there are any minor issues, but honestly, the code is so solid that it practically runs itself." Kevin nodded eagerly, clearly intimidated by the complexity of the system he was inheriting. I said nothing during these meetings, simply taking notes and occasionally confirming Marcus's oversimplified explanations. When Kevin asked about system maintenance schedules or backup protocols, I deferred to Marcus, who waved dismissively and assured everyone that such concerns were unnecessary. With 1 week remaining before my code's expiration, I began quietly backing up all my personal projects and removing any traces of my proprietary work from TechFlow's servers. I also started clearing out my desk, taking home personal items one by one, so that my departure wouldn't be obvious when the time came. Marcus was too busy enjoying his promotion to notice these small changes. He had already started bragging to other departments about his problem-solving skills and his natural aptitude for crisis management. Soon, he would have another crisis to manage, one that would test whether he truly understood the system he claimed to have created. Exactly 30 days after Marcus denied my bonus, I arrived at the office at my usual time and settled into my cubicle with a cup of coffee and a sense of anticipation. The countdown in my head had reached 0 during the night. and by now my security patch would have quietly deactivated itself, leaving TechFlow's client database exactly as vulnerable as it had been before my intervention. The first sign of trouble came at 9:47 a.m. when Kevin rushed into the office, his face pale and his hands shaking. "Something's wrong with the security system," he announced to anyone within earshot. "I'm getting error messages I've never seen before." I looked up from my computer with an expression of mild concern. "What kind of error messages?" I asked, knowing exactly what he was seeing, but wanting to maintain my facade of ignorance. "The client database is throwing authentication failures, and the backup systems aren't responding," Kevin replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "I tried calling Marcus, but he's in meetings all morning." "Let me take a look," I offered helpfully, walking over to Kevin's workstation. The screen displayed a cascade of red error messages, each one indicating a different component of my security system shutting down in sequence. It was almost beautiful in its systematic precision. I frowned thoughtfully, typing a few diagnostic commands that I knew would reveal the scope of the problem. "This is strange," I murmured, loud enough for nearby coworkers to hear. "It looks like the security patch is experiencing some kind of systematic failure." Within minutes, other team members began reporting similar issues. The phones started ringing as clients complained about being unable to access their accounts. Transaction processing slowed to a crawl, then stopped entirely. The same vulnerabilities that my original patch had fixed were now wide open again, but this time, the failure was happening during peak business hours when thousands of transactions were flowing through the system. By 10:30 a.m., the situation had escalated beyond Kevin's ability to handle. Client services was fielding hundreds of angry calls, and the transaction failure rate had reached critical levels. I estimated the company was losing approximately $20,000 every hour the system remained down. "We need to get Marcus down here immediately," declared Jennifer Walsh, our department's senior manager. She had been promoted to fill the gap left by Marcus's elevation, and was clearly unprepared for a crisis of this magnitude. I watched quietly as Kevin made increasingly frantic phone calls, trying to reach Marcus between his morning meetings. When Marcus finally answered, I could hear his voice through the phone's speaker, sharp with irritation at being interrupted during his important executive discussions. "What do you mean the system is failing?" Marcus snapped. "The security patch is completely stable. I designed it myself." Kevin glanced nervously around the room. "The whole database is down, Marcus. Clients can't access their accounts, and we're hemorrhaging money every minute." "That's impossible," Marcus replied, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "The system was working perfectly yesterday." "Can you come down and take a look?" Kevin pleaded. "I've tried everything I can think of, but nothing's working." There was a long pause before Marcus responded. "I'll be down in 10 minutes, and get Vicky involved. She helped with some of the implementation details." I suppressed a smile at his grudging acknowledgement of my role. After 30 days of taking complete credit for my work, Marcus was suddenly remembering that I had been involved in the project. It was interesting how quickly his perspective changed when he needed someone to blame for the failure. As we waited for Marcus to arrive, the situation continued deteriorating. More error messages appeared on the monitoring screens, and the phone calls from angry clients grew more frequent and more hostile. Marcus burst through the department doors at 11:15 a.m., his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. His face was flushed with a combination of anger and panic as he surveyed the chaos that had erupted in his former domain. Multiple computer screens displayed error messages in glaring red text, and the constant ringing of phones created a symphony of crisis that filled the air. "What the hell happened here?" Marcus demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. He strode directly to Kevin's workstation, pushing the younger developer aside to examine the screens himself. I watched from my desk as his confident expression gradually shifted to confusion, then alarm. "The security system started failing around 9:30 this morning," Jennifer explained, her voice tight with stress. "All the protections that were put in place last month are gone. We're back to the same vulnerabilities we had before the patch." Marcus stared at the error messages, his face growing pale as the implications became clear. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, typing furiously at the keyboard. The code was solid. I tested it thoroughly. I cleared my throat gently. "Marcus, would you like me to take a look? I might be able to help troubleshoot the system." He turned to me with desperate relief. "Yes, absolutely. You worked on some of the implementation details, right? Maybe you can figure out what went wrong." The way he phrased it, "some of the implementation details," would have been insulting if it wasn't so perfectly suited to my purposes. I walked over to the workstation and began examining the code, taking my time to create the appearance of careful analysis. "This is very strange," I said after several minutes of deliberate investigation. "It looks like the security patch has completely deactivated itself." "Deactivated itself?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising an octave. "Code doesn't just deactivate itself. Someone must have tampered with it." I shook my head slowly. "There's no evidence of external interference. It's more like the system was designed to shut down automatically after a certain period of time." "That's impossible," Marcus snapped. "I would never build an expiration date into critical security code." The room fell silent, except for the continued ringing of phones. Jennifer, Kevin, and several other team members were staring at Marcus with expressions of growing concern. His claim of designing the code was now directly contradicted by his apparent ignorance of its fundamental architecture. "Well," I said carefully, "perhaps we should focus on fixing the immediate problem. I'll need to examine the entire code base to understand why this happened and develop a new solution." "How long will that take?" Jennifer asked urgently. "We're losing money every minute this system is down." I pretended to consider the question thoughtfully. A complete rewrite of the security system would normally take several weeks, but given the emergency situation, I might be able to create a temporary fix within a few days. Marcus's face went white. "A few days? We can't afford to have the system down for a few days. Just put the old patch back in place." I shook my head regretfully. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Whatever caused the original patch to fail has corrupted the underlying code structure. We'll need to rebuild the security system from scratch." "But you still have copies of the original code, right?" Kevin asked hopefully. "The system failure appears to have corrupted the backup files as well," I replied with perfect honesty. "The backup files were corrupted because I had specifically designed them to be corrupted when the main system failed." Marcus sank into a nearby chair, the full weight of the crisis finally settling on his shoulders. By 2 p.m., word of the crisis had reached the executive floor, and TechFlow's board members began arriving at the office with expressions of barely contained fury. The company was now losing an estimated $30,000 per hour, and angry clients were threatening to terminate their contracts if the system wasn't restored immediately. Chief Executive Officer Patricia Reynolds stormed into our department with 3 other board members trailing behind her. Her sharp gray suit and severe expression made it clear that someone was about to face very unpleasant consequences for this disaster. "Marcus," she called out sharply. "My office. Now." Marcus stood on unsteady legs, shooting me a pleading look. "Patricia, I can explain everything. This is just a temporary setback." "Temporary?" Patricia's voice could have frozen water. "We've lost over $100,000 in the past 4 hours, and you're calling this temporary?" I continued working at the computer terminal, keeping my expression focused and professional while internally savoring every word of this conversation. The other team members had gone silent, watching the drama unfold with the fascination of witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "The security system that you personally presented to the board last month has completely failed," Board member Robert Hayes interjected, his voice dripping with disdain. "The same system you claimed was your innovative breakthrough." Marcus's face turned an interesting shade of red. "There must have been some kind of sabotage. The code was perfect when I designed it." "You designed it?" Patricia asked, her eyebrows rising dangerously. She turned to look at our entire team. "Is that accurate?" An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Kevin shifted nervously in his chair. Jennifer examined her shoes intently. and the other engineers suddenly found their computer screens extremely interesting. Nobody wanted to contradict Marcus directly, but nobody was willing to confirm his claim either. "Vicky," Patricia said suddenly, fixing me with her penetrating gaze, "you were involved in this project. What's your assessment of the situation?" I looked up from the computer with an expression of professional concern. "Well, the security patch appears to have been designed with some kind of time-limited functionality. Unfortunately, without access to the original design documentation, it's difficult to determine exactly why the system was built this way." "Time-limited functionality?" Robert Hayes repeated slowly. "Are you saying the security patch was programmed to self-destruct?" "It's certainly possible," I replied carefully, "though I would need to examine the original specifications to be certain." Patricia's eyes narrowed as she turned back to Marcus. "Where are the original design specifications for this security system?" Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find an answer. The truth was that he had never seen any design specifications because he hadn't designed anything. All he had were the email updates I had sent him during development, none of which contained technical details he would have understood. The documentation might have been corrupted along with the system files," he finally managed to stammer. "Might have been?" Patricia's voice was deadly quiet now. "You're telling me that you implemented a $2 million security system without maintaining proper documentation?" I cleared my throat gently. "Actually, I do have some of my personal notes from when I assisted with the implementation. They might help us understand what happened." All eyes turned to me as I opened my laptop and displayed the detailed documentation I had carefully prepared for this exact moment. The specifications clearly showed the 30-day expiration date built into the security patch, along with extensive technical details that Marcus had obviously never seen before. Patricia examined the documents with growing fury, her face darkening with each page she read. "According to these specifications," Patricia announced, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade, "this security system was explicitly designed to deactivate after 30 days. The documentation is signed and dated by Vicky Collins, not Marcus Thompson." Marcus stumbled backward, as if he had been physically struck. "That's not... those documents must be..." He trailed off, unable to finish the lie, as Patricia continued reading from my meticulously detailed technical specifications. "Furthermore," Robert Hayes added, scanning through the files on my laptop, "every email regarding this project shows Vicky as the primary developer, with Marcus listed only as the supervising manager. Yet somehow, Marcus has been taking full credit for this work in all his presentations to the board." I watched Marcus's face cycle through a fascinating array of emotions: confusion, panic, anger, and finally, a desperate attempt at defiance. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising to an almost hysterical pitch. "I was the project leader. I supervised every aspect of the development. Just because Vicky did some of the coding doesn't mean..." "Some of the coding," Patricia interrupted, her eyes flashing with fury. "According to these documents, she developed the entire algorithm from scratch while you were attending networking lunches." The room fell silent except for the continued ringing of phones from the customer service department. Marcus looked around desperately, seeking support from his former team members, but everyone avoided his gaze. Jennifer was staring at her computer screen, Kevin was pretending to read technical manuals, and the other engineers had suddenly discovered urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. "Vicky," Patricia said, turning to face me directly, "how long would it take you to repair this system?" I pretended to consider the question carefully, typing a few diagnostic commands while everyone waited for my response. "Well, since I have the original source code and specifications, I could have a basic patch in place within a few hours. A complete rebuild would take about a week." "And the cost of this repair?" "The emergency patch would be free, of course. The company is my priority right now. As for the full rebuild..." I paused thoughtfully. Normally, a project of this scope would cost around $200,000 if we hired external consultants. Patricia nodded grimly. Do whatever you need to do. Fix this immediately. Marcus stepped forward desperately. Wait, you can't just let her. You're fired, Patricia said flatly, not even looking at him. Security will escort you out of the building within the hour. We'll be conducting a full investigation into this fiasco, and I strongly suggest you retain legal counsel. I turned back to my computer and began typing, implementing the repair code I had already prepared weeks in advance. Within 30 minutes, the error messages began disappearing from the monitoring screens, and the client database slowly came back online. The phones stopped ringing as customer service representatives were able to access accounts again, and the transaction processing system resumed normal operations. Marcus stood frozen in the center of the room, watching me work with an expression of complete devastation. The realization was finally sinking in that I had orchestrated this entire scenario from the beginning. His stolen promotion, his salary increase, his reputation as an innovative leader, all of it had been built on sand, and now the tide was coming in. How? He whispered, barely audible above the sounds of the office returning to normal activity. I glanced up from my keyboard with the same serene smile I had given him 30 days earlier when he denied my bonus. I told you I understood completely, I replied softly. I understood that you would take credit for my work, just like you always do. So I made sure the code would demonstrate the difference between someone who creates solutions and someone who just steals them. Security guards appeared at Marcus's shoulders, ready to escort him from the building. His expensive suit suddenly looked rumpled and cheap, and his confident posture had collapsed into defeated slouching. As they led him toward the elevator, he turned back one last time with a look of pure hatred. You planned this, he accused, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. I planned to protect my work, I corrected calmly. What happened after that was entirely your choice. The elevator doors closed on Marcus's stunned face, and I returned my attention to the computer screen. By 4 p.m., all systems were functioning normally, and TechFlow Industries was back to earning money instead of losing it. Marcus faced immediate termination and a complete destruction of his professional reputation when the board discovered he had systematically stolen credit for my innovations while denying me promised compensation. Word spread quickly through Austin's tight-knit tech community that he had taken false credit for a major security system and then failed catastrophically when the real crisis hit, making him essentially unemployable in the industry. His expensive mortgage went into default when no company would hire someone known for stealing employee work, and his wife divorced him after learning about his pattern of professional fraud. The legal fees from TechFlow's lawsuit to recover damages consumed what little savings he had left, and he was eventually forced to move back in with his parents while working retail jobs far from the tech industry he had disgraced. His LinkedIn profile became a cautionary tale shared in management ethics seminars, and his name became synonymous with managerial incompetence throughout the regional business community. 3 months later, I signed my contract as Chief Technology Officer at Innovate Solutions, earning triple my previous salary plus equity options that would make me wealthy if the company continued growing. As I looked out from my new corner office across Austin's skyline, I reflected on how satisfying it had been to watch Marcus discover that true expertise cannot be stolen, only earned, and that sometimes the most elegant revenge is simply allowing incompetent people to face the natural consequences of their own dishonesty. I'm going to lose my house if nobody helps me, I cried, my voice breaking as I looked around the crowded Christmas dinner table. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled my parents' dining room in Phoenix, Arizona, but all I could focus on were the uncomfortable glances being exchanged between my relatives. Please, I'm begging you. I need $20,000 by January 15th, or the bank will foreclose. My name is Camilla Brooks, and I'm 29 years old. What nobody at this table knew was that 3 months earlier, I had won $50 million in the Powerball lottery. The winning ticket was hidden safely in my bedroom drawer, along with the bank statements showing my new reality, But tonight, I was putting on the performance of my lifetime. "Camilla, honey, you know money's tight for everyone right now," my wealthy Uncle Richard said, cutting into his prime rib. He owned 3 successful auto dealerships across Phoenix and had just returned from a 2-week vacation in Europe. "Maybe you should have thought about this before buying that house." I watched as he avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in his dinner plate. Aunt Patricia, his wife, nodded in agreement while adjusting her new diamond bracelet. "That's right," Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Helping you would just enable bad behavior. Sometimes people need to learn from their mistakes." I felt a surge of anger, but forced myself to keep playing the desperate relative. This was exactly why I had devised this test 3 weeks ago. After winning the lottery, I had wanted to know who in my family would actually care about my well-being when I needed them most. The results were already revealing more than I had expected. My cousin Tyler, who worked in tech and made 6 figures, suddenly found his phone fascinating. "Sorry, Camilla, but I've got my own expenses. You understand." Around the table, I watched as family member after family member found creative ways to avoid offering help. These were people who had attended my college graduation, celebrated my birthday parties, and claimed to love me. Yet when faced with what they believed was a genuine crisis, their true colors were showing. The only person who hadn't spoken was my cousin Elena. She sat quietly in the corner, still wearing her work uniform from her second job at the diner. Elena was a single mother working 2 minimum-wage jobs to support her 8-year-old daughter, Maya. She lived paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment across town, barely scraping by each month. As the conversation moved on to other topics, I caught Elena's eye. She gave me a small, sad smile that said more than any words could. Something told me that if anyone at this table would surprise me, it would be her. Later that evening, as relatives filtered out of my parents' house with full bellies and clear consciences, I sat on the front porch, thinking about the responses I had received. The December air was crisp, and Christmas lights twinkled throughout the neighborhood. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Camilla, it's Elena. Can we talk tomorrow? I have an idea that might help." I stared at the message, genuinely surprised. Elena, who struggled to pay her own rent, wanted to help me when my wealthy relatives had all declined. I texted back immediately. "Of course. Coffee at 10 a.m. at Sunshine Cafe?" "Perfect. Don't give up hope." The next morning, I arrived at the small cafe early, my mind racing with curiosity. Elena walked in exactly at 10, looking tired but determined. She ordered just black coffee, which I knew meant money was tighter than usual. "Camilla, I've been thinking about your situation all night," she began, her voice soft but serious. "I know I don't have much, but I want to help you keep your house." I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Elena, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," she interrupted gently. "You're family, and family takes care of each other. I have $12,000 saved up. It's Maya's college fund, but she's only 8. I can rebuild it." I stared at her in shock. Elena was offering her daughter's entire college fund to help me. This was money she had scraped together working double shifts, skipping meals, and buying secondhand clothes for herself and Maya. "I also talked to my manager at the diner," she continued. "She said I can pick up extra shifts through New Year's. Between tips and overtime, I might be able to scrape together another couple thousand." My heart was breaking and swelling simultaneously. Here was someone who could barely afford groceries, offering everything she had to help me. Meanwhile, Uncle Richard, who had just bought a new luxury car, couldn't spare a penny. "Elena, I can't let you sacrifice Maya's future for me," I said, though I was deeply moved by her offer. "Maya's future includes having a cousin who doesn't lose her home," Elena replied firmly. "We'll figure out the college fund later. Right now, you need help, and I'm going to give it to you." Over the next hour, Elena outlined her plan to help me raise money. She had already started selling some of her personal belongings and was planning to work every available shift at both her jobs. She had even researched local assistance programs that might be able to help. As I listened to her detailed plan to save my fictional financial crisis, I realized I had found something more valuable than $50 million. I had found the one person in my family whose love was unconditional and genuine. That night, I began planning how to reveal the truth and reward Elena's incredible generosity, while ensuring my selfish relatives understood exactly what they had lost. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena threw herself into helping me with a determination that both amazed and humbled me. She picked up every extra shift available at both the diner and the grocery store where she worked part-time. I watched her leave for work at 5 a.m. and return home after 11 p.m., exhausted but refusing to give up. "How's Maya handling you being gone so much?" I asked during one of our coffee meetings. "She understands," Elena said, though I could see the guilt in her eyes. I explained that family helps family, and sometimes that means sacrifices. "She's proud that we're helping you." The depth of Elena's commitment became even clearer when she showed up at my apartment with a box of items she planned to sell. "I found a buyer for my grandmother's ring," she said, pulling out a beautiful vintage piece. "It's worth about $1,500. Combined with what I've saved from extra shifts and the money from my savings account, I'll have almost $10,000 for you by next week." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This ring was Elena's most precious possession, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations. She was willing to sell it to help me keep a house I wasn't actually going to lose. Meanwhile, the silence from my wealthy relatives was deafening. Uncle Richard had posted photos on social media from the expensive steakhouse dinner. Aunt Patricia shared pictures of her latest shopping spree. Cousin Tyler posted about his weekend ski trip to Colorado. Not one of them had reached out to check on my supposed financial crisis or offer any assistance. My parents, who lived comfortably on my father's retirement from his accounting firm, had offered sympathy, but no financial help. "We're living on a fixed income now," my mother had explained, though I knew they had substantial savings. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking. Elena, who had to choose between buying groceries and paying for gas, was moving heaven and earth to help me. My wealthy relatives, who could have easily spared $20,000 without impacting their lifestyles, had dismissed my crisis without a second thought. The breaking point came when Elena called me on New Year's Eve, exhausted from working a double shift. "Camilla, I have good news," she said, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "I managed to get the money together. $14,000. I know it's not the full $20,000 you need, but it's a start. We can figure out the rest." As I hung up the phone, I realized it was time to end this charade. Elena had proven beyond any doubt that she possessed the kind of character money couldn't buy. Tomorrow, I would call a family meeting and reveal the truth. It was time for everyone to learn who had passed the test and who had failed spectacularly. The lottery ticket in my drawer wasn't just worth $50 million anymore. It had become the key to revealing the true value of family loyalty and unconditional love. On January 2nd, I sent a group text to all the relatives who had been at Christmas dinner, plus a few others I wanted to include. "Family meeting at my parents' house tomorrow at 2 p.m. I have important news about my financial situation. Please be there." The responses came quickly. Uncle Richard replied that he'd try to make it if his golf game ended early. Aunt Patricia said she hoped I had figured things out on my own. Cousin Tyler sent back a thumbs-up emoji. My parents confirmed they'd be there, and Elena immediately called. "Did you find a solution?" she asked, hope evident in her tired voice. "You could say that," I replied carefully. "Just make sure you're there tomorrow. And Elena, thank you for everything you've done. It means more than you'll ever know." That evening, I sat in my bedroom staring at the lottery ticket that had started this entire journey. In 3 months, I had gone from ecstatic winner to someone who understood the true nature of the people around me. The money had always been life-changing, but the knowledge I had gained was perhaps even more valuable. I carefully placed the ticket in an envelope, along with a cashier's check I had prepared weeks earlier. Tomorrow would reveal everything. The next afternoon, my parents' living room filled with family members, though some arrivals were more reluctant than others. Uncle Richard showed up 20 minutes late, complaining about traffic. Aunt Patricia brought a store-bought dessert and immediately began gossiping with my mother about a mutual friend's divorce. Elena arrived precisely on time, carrying a worn envelope. She had dressed in her nicest clothes, a simple black dress she reserved for special occasions. Maya wasn't with her. Elena had arranged for a neighbor to watch her daughter. "Camilla, before you start," Elena said quietly, approaching me with the envelope. "I wanted to give you this. It's not the full amount you need, but it's everything I could manage." I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside was $14,000 in cash and money orders, Elena's entire savings, the money from selling her grandmother's ring, and every penny she had earned working double shifts for 2 weeks. "Elena, you've already done more than enough," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Family takes care of family," she replied simply, echoing what she had told me at the cafe. "We'll figure out the rest together." As the room settled and conversations died down, I stood at the front of the living room. 15 family members looked at me with varying degrees of interest and impatience. Some checked their phones. Uncle Richard glanced at his expensive watch. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my heart pounding. "As you know, I've been facing a serious financial crisis. I told you at Christmas that I needed $20,000 to save my house from foreclosure." Aunt Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Camilla, if you're going to ask again—" "I'm not asking for anything anymore," I interrupted, "because I've learned everything I needed to know about each of you." A confused murmur rippled through the room. My cousin Tyler looked up from his phone for the first time. "I have an announcement to make about my financial situation," I continued, reaching into my purse. "But first, I want to thank Elena for her incredible generosity and sacrifice over the past 2 weeks." Elena looked puzzled, clearly wondering where this was heading. Elena offered me her daughter's college fund. She worked double shifts for 2 weeks straight, barely sleeping. She sold her grandmother's ring, a priceless family heirloom. She did all of this despite struggling to pay her own bills, despite raising Maya alone on minimum wage. I paused, looking around the room at faces that were beginning to show signs of unease. "And the rest of you? You made excuses. You found reasons why helping family wasn't your responsibility. Some of you could have written a check for $20,000 without even noticing the missing money." The room was dead silent now. "I want to share something with all of you," I continued, pulling the lottery ticket from the envelope. 3 months ago, I won $50 million in the Powerball lottery. The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos erupted. "What?" Uncle Richard jumped to his feet, his face turning red. "You've had $50 million this whole time?" "That's impossible," Aunt Patricia sputtered. "You were crying about losing your house." "Because I was testing you," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. I wanted to know who in this family would actually care about my well-being when I needed help. I wanted to see who would sacrifice for me the way I had always believed family should. Cousin Tyler's mouth hung open. "You lied to us? You made us feel guilty for not giving you money you didn't even need?" "I didn't make you feel anything," I replied firmly. "Your response to what you believed was a genuine crisis revealed your true character. You chose not to help someone you claimed to love when you thought they desperately needed it." Elena sat frozen, staring at me with wide eyes. "Camilla, I don't understand. If you have $50 million, why did you let me?" "Because you passed the test," I said, turning to face her directly. "Elena, you were the only person in this room who offered genuine help. You gave everything you had, even though you have less than anyone else here." I reached into the envelope and pulled out the cashier's check I had prepared. "This is for you, Elena. $10 million. The paper fluttered slightly in my shaking hand as I held it out to her. Elena's face went completely white. "10 million?" she whispered, unable to take the check. "You offered everything to help family," I said, pressing the check into her hands. "This is my way of showing what real family loyalty means." The room exploded into shouting. Uncle Richard was on his feet, pointing at me accusingly. "This is insane. You can't just give away $10 million because she fell for your manipulation." "It wasn't manipulation," I shot back. "It was a character test, and she's the only one who passed." Aunt Patricia rushed forward, her face flushed with anger and desperation. "Camilla, honey, you have to understand. We didn't know you actually had money. If you had known I could pay you back, you would have helped?" I interrupted. "That's exactly the problem. You only help when there's something in it for you." Elena was staring at the check in her hands, tears streaming down her face. "Camilla, I can't accept this. I didn't help you for money. I helped because I love you. And that's exactly why you deserve it," I replied. "Maya will never have to worry about college costs. You'll never have to work 2 jobs again. You can pursue that nursing degree you've always dreamed about." The rest of the family was in various states of shock and outrage. Uncle Richard began pacing, muttering about lawyers and mental competency. Aunt Patricia was crying, begging me to reconsider. Tyler kept shaking his head, saying, "This can't be real," over and over. My parents sat quietly, absorbing what had just happened. My mother finally spoke. "Camilla, this seems rather extreme. These are family members who love you." "Are they?" I asked. "Because when I needed them most, they abandoned me. Elena was willing to sacrifice her daughter's future for mine. That's love. What the rest of you showed was selfishness disguised as tough love." Uncle Richard's pacing grew more agitated as the reality of the situation sank in. "You can't be serious about this," he said, his voice rising. "I'm your uncle. I helped raise you. One mistake doesn't erase years of family history." "One mistake?" I turned to face him directly. "You told me I made my bed and should lie in it. You said helping me would enable bad behavior. You sat at that Christmas table, fresh from a European vacation, and told your supposedly struggling niece that money was tight." "I didn't know you were actually in trouble," he protested. "People ask for money all the time. You have to be careful about these things." "But I wasn't just people," I replied coldly. "I was your niece, crying and begging for help to keep my home. The fact that you could dismiss that so easily tells me everything I need to know about your character." Aunt Patricia tried a different approach, suddenly switching to a sweet, pleading tone. "Camilla, sweetheart, you know I've always loved you like my own daughter. I was just trying to teach you responsibility. If you need help, of course I'll write you a check right now." The shameless desperation in her voice was almost shocking. This was the same woman who had sat smugly at Christmas dinner, lecturing me about enabling bad behavior while showing off her new jewelry. "Too late," I said simply. "You had your chance to show you cared. Instead, you chose to judge and condemn." Elena finally found her voice, though she was still trembling. "Camilla, this is too much. I don't need $10 million. I just need to know that Maya will be okay and that we can pay our bills." "You're getting both," I said firmly. "Plus the freedom to stop working yourself to death and the ability to help other people the way you helped me. Imagine what you could do with this money. Not just for yourself, but for others who need help." The transformation in Elena's expression was beautiful to watch. The exhaustion and worry that had been constant companions for years began to fade, replaced by hope and possibility. "I could go back to school," she whispered. "I could become a nurse like I always wanted. Maya could have everything she needs. Exactly, I said, smiling for the first time since the meeting began. Cousin Tyler finally snapped out of his shock. This is completely unfair. Just because we didn't fall for your sob story doesn't mean we don't care about you. Didn't fall for it? I repeated incredulously. You believed a family member was about to lose their home, and your response was to ignore them. How is that caring? The arguments continued for another 20 minutes, with various family members trying different tactics to convince me to share the wealth more broadly. Some apologized profusely. Others grew angry and accusatory. A few tried to guilt me about splitting up the family. Through it all, Elena sat quietly, occasionally staring at the check in her hands as if it might disappear. Finally, she looked up at me. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. You showed me what real love looks like. You sacrificed for someone you thought was in trouble, expecting nothing in return. That's worth more than all the money in the world. As the family meeting dissolved into chaos and accusations, I felt a deep sense of peace. The test was complete, the results were clear, and justice had been served. Elena's shocked gratitude was worth every penny of the $10 million, and the outrage of my selfish relatives only confirmed that I had made the right choice. Within hours of the family meeting, word of Elena's windfall began spreading through our extended family and community. Elena, still in shock, had called her mother to share the news, and from there it spread like wildfire. By evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from relatives who hadn't even been at the meeting. The immediate aftermath was swift and merciless. Uncle Richard's wife, Patricia, posted a bitter rant on social media about family members who manipulate and divide, before quickly deleting it when people began asking questions. But screenshots had already been taken and shared. Elena's transformation was immediate and profound. She quit both her exhausting jobs that very week, giving proper notice but clearly relieved to finally escape the cycle of endless work and financial stress. Her first purchase wasn't anything extravagant. It was a reliable car to replace the aging vehicle that had left her stranded multiple times. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a dream, Elena told me when we met for coffee a few days later. She looked different. The constant worry lines around her eyes had softened, and she carried herself with a confidence I had never seen before. It's real, I assured her. You earned every penny of it. The contrast between Elena's quiet gratitude and my other relatives' increasingly desperate attempts to contact me was stark. Uncle Richard left multiple voicemails, his tone shifting from anger to pleading as the days passed. Aunt Patricia sent a lengthy email detailing all the ways she had always been there for me, conveniently forgetting her harsh words at Christmas dinner. But the most telling response came from Cousin Tyler, who showed up unannounced at my apartment 3 days after the meeting. His usual cocky demeanor was replaced by barely contained panic. Camilla, we need to talk, he said, pushing past me into my living room. This whole lottery thing has gotten out of hand. People are talking, and it's making the whole family look bad. I almost laughed at his audacity. The family is making itself look bad. I just revealed what was already there. The long-term consequences of my revelation began unfolding over the following weeks, with a precision that even I hadn't anticipated. The story of Elena's generosity and the family's callousness spread throughout our tight-knit Phoenix community, where everyone seemed to know everyone else. Uncle Richard's auto dealerships began feeling the impact first. Customers who heard the story started taking their business elsewhere, uncomfortable with patronizing someone who would abandon family in crisis. His longtime partner, Mr. Patterson, quietly ended their business relationship after his own daughter confronted him about associating with someone so heartless. People don't want to do business with someone they can't trust to do right by their own family, Patterson explained to mutual friends, and the sentiment echoed throughout their professional circles. Aunt Patricia faced social ostracism that was perhaps even more devastating. Her church congregation, where she had served on the charity committee for years, quietly asked her to step down after members questioned how someone could preach about helping the needy while refusing to help her own struggling niece. Their country club friends began excluding them from social gatherings. The story had spread through their social circle like wildfire, and the consensus was clear. People who would abandon family in crisis couldn't be trusted in friendship either. Meanwhile, Elena's life was transforming in beautiful ways. She enrolled in nursing school at Arizona State University, something she had dreamed about for years but never thought possible. Maya, thriving with the stability and security her mother's windfall had provided, was enrolled in an excellent private school where she could pursue her love of art and music. Elena used her newfound financial freedom not just for herself and Maya, but to help others. She quietly paid off medical bills for struggling families at Maya's former school and established a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing healthcare careers. The woman who had sacrificed everything to help me was now positioned to help countless others, while those who had turned away in my supposed time of need watched their own lives crumble under the weight of their exposed character. As I watched Elena flourish and my selfish relatives face the consequences of their actions, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Elena's kindness had been rewarded, and the truth about everyone's character was now clear for all to see. The months that followed brought a reckoning that reached far beyond what I had initially imagined. Uncle Richard's business empire, built on community relationships and trust, crumbled as customers and partners distanced themselves from someone they now viewed as fundamentally selfish. His marriage to Patricia grew strained under the financial pressure and social isolation, with Patricia blaming him for their downfall, while conveniently forgetting her own role in rejecting my pleas for help. Cousin Tyler found his social media marketing business suffering, as clients questioned whether they wanted to associate with someone whose character had been so publicly exposed, and other family members faced similar social and professional consequences, as word of their callousness spread throughout Phoenix's interconnected communities. As I watched Elena graduate from nursing school with honors 2 years later, her daughter Maya beaming with pride in the audience, I realized that my $50 million test had revealed something more valuable than money could ever buy: the difference between genuine love and conditional affection, and the peace that comes from knowing exactly who deserves a place in your heart. "Alice, I finally got it!" David's voice burst through my phone speaker as I was organizing files in our home office in Phoenix, Arizona. The raise, $25,000 more per year, plus the corner office. After 3 years of grinding, Ms. Johnson finally recognized my potential. My heart soared as I dropped the papers I was holding. My name is Alice Thompson. I'm 39 years old, and I work as a senior accountant for a mid-sized manufacturing firm. For what felt like forever, I had watched my husband David pour everything into Silverwick Partners, staying late every night, working weekends, sacrificing our time together for the promise of advancement that his boss, Ms. Victoria Johnson, kept dangling just out of reach. "David, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you," I exclaimed, feeling genuine joy bubble up inside me. This promotion represented everything we had worked toward: the financial security we needed to start a family, the stability to buy a real house instead of renting this cramped apartment. "I can't believe it's finally happening," David continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Johnson just called me into her office and told me the board approved everything. I start the new position Monday, but I'm staying late tonight to finalize some transition paperwork with her." As I listened to David's excitement, my mind was already racing with celebration plans. This called for something special. Not just takeout Chinese food or a bottle of wine from the corner store. This was the moment we had been sacrificing for, the breakthrough that would change our entire future. "How late will you be working?" I asked, glancing at the clock. It was already 6 p.m. "Probably another 2 hours. Johnson wants to go over all the new responsibilities in detail. You know how thorough she is about these transitions." After we hung up, I stood in our kitchen, overwhelmed with happiness and relief. All those nights of eating dinner alone while David worked late. All those times I had to attend social events by myself because he was putting in extra hours. All those moments when I wondered if his dedication would ever pay off. It had all been worth it. But this news deserved more than just a phone conversation. David had worked so hard for this moment, and I wanted to share in his triumph properly. I decided to surprise him with his favorite meal delivered right to his office. We could celebrate together, maybe even christen that new corner office he had mentioned. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out the salmon fillets I had been saving for a special occasion. David loved my grilled salmon with herb butter, and tonight seemed like the perfect time to prepare it. As I gathered ingredients, I imagined his face when I walked into his office with a home-cooked celebration dinner. He would be so surprised, so touched that I had gone to this effort. As I prepared the salmon, my mind wandered to our journey together. David and I met during our senior year at Arizona State University, both studying business with dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. He was charming and ambitious, always talking about the life we would build together once we graduated and found our footing in the professional world. When David landed the position at Silverwick Partners 3 years ago, we thought it was our golden ticket. The company specialized in financial consulting for mid-sized businesses, and David started in their analysis department under the direct supervision of Ms. Victoria Johnson. She was in her mid-40s, recently divorced, and according to David, brilliant at navigating corporate politics. From the beginning, David spoke constantly about Ms. Johnson's mentorship. She stayed late to train him, invited him to important client meetings, and promised to help him advance within the company. I was grateful that David had found such a supportive boss. The business world could be ruthless, and having an advocate seemed like a blessing. But over the past year, I had noticed subtle changes in David's behavior. He became more secretive about work conversations, more defensive when I asked about office dynamics. When I suggested we invite Ms. Johnson for dinner to thank her for her support, David always found excuses to avoid it. There were other small things too. New cologne that I hadn't bought him, late-night text messages that he quickly deleted, a sudden interest in expensive clothing that stretched our budget. When I questioned these changes, David always had reasonable explanations. Professional image mattered for advancement. Networking required constant communication. Success demanded certain standards. I pushed my concerns aside, attributing them to the stress we were both under as he worked toward this promotion. The salmon sizzled in the pan, filling our small apartment with rich, savory aromas. I prepared his favorite herb butter, a mixture of fresh dill, garlic, and lemon that he always said reminded him of our honeymoon in Seattle. As I carefully arranged everything in our good containers, I felt a surge of pride in our partnership. We had made sacrifices, but they were paying off. I changed into a nice dress, the blue one David always complimented, and touched up my makeup. This surprise visit would be the perfect way to mark this milestone in our marriage. Maybe we could even go out for drinks afterward to celebrate properly. The drive to Silverwick Partners took me through downtown Phoenix's business district, past the gleaming office towers where successful people built their careers. Tonight, David was joining their ranks. Tonight, all our patience and hard work was finally being rewarded. As I parked in the underground garage and gathered the warm dinner containers, I felt a flutter of excitement. David would be so surprised to see me, so touched by this gesture. We could finally start planning for the future we had always talked about. The house, the children, the financial security that had seemed so elusive just hours ago. The lobby of Silverwick Partners was mostly empty at this hour, with only the security guard and a few scattered employees working late. I signed in at the front desk and took the elevator to the 15th floor, where David's department was located. The building felt different in the evening, quieter, more intimate somehow. Perfect for a private celebration between husband and wife. The 15th floor was dimly lit, with most offices dark and empty. I walked past David's usual cubicle, which would soon be his former workspace, toward what I assumed would be his new corner office. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I imagined his reaction to my surprise. I approached the reception area where Claire, David's young assistant, was still at her desk. She was in her mid-20s, always bubbly and energetic during the few times I had visited the office. When she saw me approaching with the dinner containers, her face lit up with what seemed like barely contained excitement. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson," Claire exclaimed, her voice bright with surprise. "What brings you here so late?" "I wanted to surprise David with a celebration dinner for his promotion," I explained, holding up the containers. "He just called with the wonderful news about his raise in the corner office." Claire's expression shifted slightly, and she glanced toward the hallway with an odd smile. "Oh, how sweet of you. He's actually in the main conference room right now with Ms. Johnson. They're going over his new position in detail. You know how thorough she is about these transitions." "Of course," I nodded, feeling my excitement build. "I don't want to interrupt anything important." "Which conference room?" "The big one at the end of the executive hall," Claire said, pointing down the corridor. "The one with the beautiful city view. I'm sure they won't mind a quick interruption for such good news." I thanked Claire and headed down the hallway, carefully balancing the warm containers. It made perfect sense that David and Ms. Johnson would be finalizing the details of his promotion in the company's most impressive conference room. I imagined walking in to find them reviewing organizational charts and discussing David's new responsibilities. As I approached the conference room, I could see light spilling from under the door. I heard muffled voices inside, though I couldn't make out the words. Not wanting to interrupt what might be an important strategic discussion, I decided to peek in first to gauge whether this was an appropriate time for my surprise. I gently turned the handle and pushed the door open just a crack, ready to catch David's eye and gesture with the dinner containers. But what I saw through that small opening made my blood turn to ice. David was pressed against the conference table, his shirt unbuttoned and tie loosened, locked in a passionate embrace with Ms. Johnson. Her hands were tangled in his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist, their bodies moving together with the familiarity of practiced lovers. This wasn't a congratulatory hug between colleagues. This was the intimate embrace of two people who had been deceiving me for months, possibly years. Time stopped as I stood frozen in that doorway, the warm dinner containers suddenly feeling like lead weights in my hands. My husband of 8 years was betraying everything we had built together, and I was watching it happen in real time. The herb butter salmon I had prepared with such love and excitement felt like a cruel joke, a symbol of my own naivety. I carefully, silently pulled the door closed and stepped back into the hallway. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind was surprisingly clear. The promotion hadn't been about David's hard work or professional merit. It had been payment for services rendered. Ms. Johnson hadn't been mentoring him professionally. She had been grooming him personally, and I had been too trusting to see it. Every late night, every weekend conference call, every defensive reaction when I asked about work, it all crystallized into devastating clarity. David's new cologne, his secretive text messages, his sudden interest in expensive clothes, none of it had been about professional advancement. It had all been about impressing another woman while lying to his wife. I walked back toward the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. As I passed Claire's desk, she looked up with that same bright expression, and suddenly, I understood the barely contained amusement I had seen in her eyes. She knew about the affair. Of course she knew. She probably helped schedule their private meetings, maybe even covered for them when colleagues asked questions. "Did you find them?" Claire asked with false innocence, but I could hear the malicious satisfaction in her voice now. "Yes," I managed to say, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. They were very focused on his new position. In the elevator, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes, trying to process what I had witnessed. The worst part wasn't just the physical betrayal. It was the systematic deception. David had used my support, my sacrifices, my unwavering belief in his integrity to build a relationship with his boss. He had let me celebrate his success while knowing it was built on adultery. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Working late on transition details with Johnson. Don't wait up. Thanks for being so understanding about my career demands. Love you." The audacity of the message sent a surge of cold fury through me. He was literally in that woman's arms while texting me about love and understanding. But instead of responding with emotion, I felt something else rising within me, a calculating anger that surprised me with its clarity. I drove home in silence, my accountant's mind already shifting into analytical mode. If David wanted to play games with our marriage, I needed to protect myself financially. Within an hour of arriving home, I had quietly transferred the majority of our joint savings into my personal account, money I had contributed equally over the years. I changed passwords on our shared credit cards and put fraud alerts on our accounts. But as I worked through these protective measures, my professional instincts began noticing patterns that troubled me. David's recent raises and bonuses seemed unusually generous for someone at his level in the company. Ms. Johnson's authority to approve such significant compensation adjustments raised questions about proper corporate oversight and financial controls. I opened David's laptop. He had always been careless about security, and found his work email still logged in. What I discovered there went far beyond a simple office affair. Email after email revealed not just their personal relationship, but evidence of financial irregularities that made my blood run cold. Ms. Johnson had been systematically manipulating David's performance reviews and approving unauthorized bonuses, but more disturbing were the communications about employee pension fund investments. She had been redirecting pension contributions into high-risk investments through companies she controlled, and when those investments failed, she was covering the losses with money from other corporate accounts. David's promotion wasn't just payment for their affair. It was hush money to keep him quiet about missing pension funds that belonged to hard-working employees planning their retirements. Over the next 3 days, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy while conducting my own investigation. David returned home that night, full of excitement about his promotion, spinning elaborate stories about the detailed strategy session with Ms. Johnson. I listened with apparent enthusiasm, even congratulating him on his dedication finally paying off. "Johnson says this is just the beginning," David said over breakfast, completely oblivious to my discovery. "She believes I have executive potential. With her continued mentorship, I could be running my own division within 2 years." The word mentorship made my stomach turn, but I smiled and nodded supportively. "She certainly seems invested in your future." While David was at work, I reached out to Janet Winters, a former colleague who now worked with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. As a senior accountant, I had professional connections throughout Phoenix's business community, and Janet specialized in corporate fraud investigations. "Alice, it's wonderful to hear from you," Janet said when I called. "What can I do for you?" "I need confidential advice about potential financial irregularities," I said carefully. "If someone suspected that company resources were being misused for personal relationships, what kind of documentation would be needed for investigation?" Janet's tone became more serious. "That could constitute several federal crimes: embezzlement, conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty. The key would be proving systematic misuse of corporate assets. Are you seeing irregularities at your firm?" "Not my firm, my husband's company. I have reason to believe there are serious financial improprieties involving pension fund management." "Alice, if you're talking about pension fund fraud, that's extremely serious. Federal prosecutors take retirement security violations very seriously. Do you have access to documentation?" That evening, while David was supposedly working late again, I conducted a thorough examination of his computer files. The evidence I found exceeded my worst fears. David and Ms. Johnson hadn't just been having an affair, they had been systematically stealing from employee retirement accounts. Ms. Johnson had diverted over $1.2 million from pension funds into shell companies she controlled. When those investments failed, she used money from operational accounts to cover the shortfalls, creating an increasingly complex web of financial deception that would eventually collapse and destroy dozens of employees' retirement security. The most damning evidence was a series of emails where David expressed concerns about the missing pension money, and Ms. Johnson's responses offering him financial incentives to remain quiet. Other messages revealed their plan to eventually frame several innocent employees for the financial irregularities when the scheme inevitably unraveled. My hands shook as I copied these files to a secure drive. This wasn't just adultery. It was federal fraud that would devastate the financial futures of people who had trusted their employer with their retirement savings. Some of these employees were in their 50s and 60s, depending on those pensions for basic survival after decades of loyal service. I spent the rest of the night creating a comprehensive documentation package that detailed every aspect of their criminal conspiracy. By dawn, I had built a case that would not only destroy their careers, but likely result in federal prison sentences. The next morning, I called Janet and requested an emergency meeting. We met at a discreet coffee shop downtown, where I presented the evidence I had gathered. Janet's expression grew increasingly grave as she reviewed the emails, financial transfers, and pension fund documentation. "Alice, this is massive," Janet said quietly. "We're looking at multiple federal charges: wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, possibly RICO violations. How do you want to proceed?" "I want full prosecution," I said without hesitation. "But I also want to protect the employees whose retirement money has been stolen. They deserve to know their financial security is at risk." Working with Janet and the FBI's white-collar crime unit, I spent the following week building an airtight case while maintaining my facade of ignorant wife. Federal agents installed monitoring software to track any attempts David might make to delete evidence, and I continued recording conversations where he discussed work matters. The breakthrough came when David mentioned that Ms. Johnson was planning to transfer the remaining accessible pension funds to offshore accounts for better security and growth potential. This gave investigators the urgency they needed to act before the money disappeared permanently. "We're executing search warrants tomorrow morning," Janet informed me during our final coordination meeting. "Can you ensure David will be in the office around 10 a.m.? "He's always there by 8:30, I confirmed. He's been going in early to prepare for his new responsibilities. That final morning, I prepared David's favorite breakfast and even packed him a lunch, playing the role of supportive wife one last time. As he prepared to leave for what would be his last day of freedom, I kissed him goodbye, knowing this would be our final normal interaction. "Have a productive day, honey," I said, my voice steady. "I hope everything goes smoothly with your transition into the new role." "Thanks, Alice. You've been so patient and supportive through this whole process. Johnson was right when she said I was lucky to have such an understanding wife." The irony of his words was almost overwhelming, but I managed to smile. "I'm sure Ms. Johnson has given you lots of valuable advice." 2 hours after David left, I received a text from Janet. "Teams are moving into position. Thank you for your courage in exposing this fraud. Justice will be served today." I drove to Silverwick Partners and parked across the street, arriving just as FBI agents and financial crimes investigators were entering the building. Several news vans were already positioned outside. Janet had coordinated with media contacts to ensure public awareness of the pension fund theft. Through the building's glass lobby, I could see agents moving systematically through the offices with evidence boxes and computer equipment. Employees were gathering in confused clusters, their faces reflecting shock and concern as they realized something major was happening to their company. My phone rang. It was David. "Alice, something terrible is happening. The FBI is here with search warrants, and they just arrested Johnson. They're asking me all kinds of questions about pension funds and financial transfers. I don't understand what's going on." "I think you understand perfectly," I said calmly, watching through the windows as federal agents approached David's desk. "The question is whether you're going to tell the truth or continue the lies." "What are you talking about? Alice, you have to help me. They're treating me like a criminal." "You are a criminal, David. You stole money from people's retirement accounts while lying to your wife. The FBI has all the evidence they need." Through the glass, I watched David's face go white as he processed my words. The phone slipped from his hand as federal agents approached with handcuffs. "Mrs. Thompson." Agent Rodriguez, the lead investigator, had approached my car. "We've secured both suspects and all the financial evidence. Your information was crucial to preventing further theft from those pension accounts." As I watched David being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. I felt only cold satisfaction. This was the man who had promised to love and honor me, who had used my trust to facilitate crimes against innocent people. The arrests became front-page news across Phoenix within hours. Corporate executives arrested in million-dollar pension fraud dominated local television coverage, with reporters interviewing shocked Silverwick Partners employees who had just learned their retirement savings were at risk. I stood in the lobby of the federal building as David and Ms. Johnson were processed, watching through security glass as they were fingerprinted and photographed. David kept looking toward the entrance, still believing somehow that I would come to his rescue, that this was all a misunderstanding I could help resolve. Agent Rodriguez approached me with an update. Both suspects are being held without bail pending federal grand jury proceedings. The evidence you provided has enabled us to freeze all their assets and begin recovering the stolen pension funds. What about the employees? I asked. How much of their retirement money can be recovered? We've identified most of the diverted funds. Between asset seizures and federal insurance protections, we expect to recover approximately 90% of the stolen money. Your early intervention prevented a complete catastrophe. Through the glass, I watched Ms. Johnson arguing with her court-appointed attorney, her polished professional demeanor finally cracking under the weight of federal criminal charges. David sat slumped in a holding cell, still wearing the expensive shirt I had helped him pick out that morning, probably still unable to comprehend how his world had collapsed so completely. Claire, David's assistant, was arrested later that afternoon as investigators discovered she had been paid additional money to facilitate communications between David and Ms. Johnson while helping them cover their tracks. Her giggling amusement during my office visit now made perfect sense. She had been enjoying the drama of deception while profiting from it. The local business community reacted with shock and outrage as details of the pension fraud emerged. Silverwick Partners' stock price plummeted, and several major clients immediately terminated their contracts. The company that David had sacrificed our marriage to advance in was now facing potential bankruptcy due to the crimes he had helped commit. The trial proceedings stretched over 8 months, during which the full scope of David and Ms. Johnson's criminal conspiracy became public record. Federal prosecutors, armed with the comprehensive evidence I had provided, rejected all plea bargain attempts and pursued maximum sentences. Ms. Johnson received 10 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution to affected employees. Her professional licenses were permanently revoked, and her personal assets were seized to compensate victims. The judge specifically noted that, as a senior executive, she had betrayed the fundamental trust that employees place in their leadership. David was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for conspiracy and aiding in embezzlement. Despite his attorney's arguments about manipulation and coercion, the judge emphasized that David's education and professional background made his crimes particularly inexcusable. Like Ms. Johnson, he lost all professional certifications and faced complete financial ruin. The personal consequences were equally devastating. Ms. Johnson's teenage children, who had been living with their father since her divorce, publicly disowned her after learning about her crimes. Her reputation in Phoenix's business community was permanently destroyed, with her case becoming a cautionary tale taught in corporate ethics courses. David's family cut all contact with him after the affair, and embezzlement became public knowledge. His parents, who had always been proud of his corporate success, refused to visit him in prison or provide any financial support. His professional network evaporated as former colleagues distanced themselves from the scandal. The FBI investigation revealed that David and Ms. Johnson had been planning to flee the country with the remaining pension funds, having already established offshore accounts and obtained false documentation. Their arrest prevented what could have been the complete destruction of dozens of families' retirement security. The employees of Silverwick Partners, supported by their recovered pension funds and a successful class action lawsuit, eventually found new employment as the company restructured under federal oversight. David and Ms. Johnson emerged from federal prison to find themselves unemployable pariahs in the business world, their criminal records ensuring that their betrayal of trust would follow them for the rest of their lives. The pension funds they had stolen were fully restored with interest, but their own financial futures remained permanently destroyed by their choices. Ms. Johnson lost custody of her children permanently and struggled to find even basic employment, while David discovered that no company would hire a convicted embezzler, regardless of his education or experience. As I reflected on the journey from that devastating moment in the conference room to watching justice served in federal court, I realized that exposing their crimes had protected innocent people while ensuring that corporate fraud faced serious consequences. The betrayal that shattered my marriage ultimately led to justice for everyone they had wronged, and I found peace knowing that their greed and deception had become the instruments of their own destruction.